you feel there's still a lot of work to do about
women.
Yeah, about raising career prospects.
Not just women. I mean, this I'm preaching to converted here, so I don't almost need to say it. But the truth of the matter is that until customers will pay a proper price for food in a restaurant, we are not going to be able to pay people properly. We're not going to be able to give up long shifts and split shifts and basically exploiting young people who are desperate to get into the business. And we won't be able to do it while we're constantly competing with, all you can eat for £3.99.
Yeah. So going back to there's a structure about hospitality. There's a lot of themes going on here. It's about women. It's about even going back to the PM Trust and the PM Club. When you started out, you remember the PM Club?
Yes, but it was all boys
then.
And yes, I remember. I can't remember what I did for them, but I did work a bit with the PM Club, and it was in Earl's Court then. And the main problem was that everybody was on split shifts, but they were quite rigid split shifts. They weren't like now when two shifts just merge into one and nobody gets any time off at all. So there was this chunk in the middle of the day, but it was never enough to get home and have a cup of tea and put your feet up for half an hour. So young lads were wandering around the West End, and it wasn't just that they were all, villains and needed keeping off the street. Poor buggers. I mean, if it wasn't summer and they could go into the parks, they'd get more tired. This rest, so-called 4 hours rest in the middle of the day, wasn't a rest at all, because they'd be walking around the streets and able to sit down. They couldn't afford to go and have a cup of tea or a drink.
Because obviously the trust is sort of reinventing itself and developing itself to provide support. But do you feel that at least the hospitality industry has moved on?
Yeah, at last. I mean, when I first started campaigning about the way chefs and restaurateurs behave to young people, I was thought of as some sort of wimpish woman who couldn't take the heat in the kitchen, and if you were going to be a chef, you had to be macho, and I used to have my hand burnt over the grill if I didn't do the right thing, and I was locked in the deep freeze and put in the stock pot. And people were proud of this, absolutely proud of it, and they thought it was the thing to continue. But I'm glad to say that's pretty well past. I mean, it's finally got into restaurateurs' heads, as it has into the armies, that you can't learn if you're frightened. It's quite simple. You cannot learn if you're frightened. Your brain shuts down and you can't take anything. So what I used to rather rudely call the Gordon Ramsay School of Management. Is now, he knows very well. And in fact, my brother once interviewed Gordon Ramsay, and he was rather nervous because my brother was working as a journalist. And he has the same name as me, Leith, and so he said, "Oh God, if I go and interview Gordon, he'll have a go, because Prue's always having a go at him." And Gordon was, as Gordon is, utterly charming, an absolute genius. I mean, anybody who's ever seen him stuffing a pig's trotter will know the guy can cook. I mean, he's just amazing. Anyway, that's beside the point. He said to Jamie, "Well, of course I know you're Prue's brother." He said, "And if I was doing what Prue's doing, which is running a chef school and trying to get people into the industry, I would be a pussycat. I'd be just like it." So she said, "But I'm running Manchester United, and so what I want is, 50 young men who do what they're told, don't argue, can stand the heat in the kitchen." And he gave a very good sort of argument.
But you didn't buy it?
Not entirely, because I don't think you need to be rough to do that.
When you started out in the business, I think it was back in the 60s, you started with your catering business and then Leith. I mean, did you bring a new perspective to the way you wanted to run a business, and particularly as a woman at that time, because no one was really doing what you were doing?
Well, that was one of the reasons I did it, because I didn't know that I wasn't doing it. I mean, I was so ignorant and so young that I had no idea that wasn't the way to run a restaurant. So I had never worked in a restaurant, and yet I had the chutzpah to think that I could run one. So I first of all, I had the catering company, and then I did quite well. So then I set out. I mean, I think everybody in the trade really wants a restaurant, don't they? No, some know better now. Some know better now. But when you're young and you start off, all cooks want to feed other people and see the pleasure that they have in eating. So I wanted to do that. But I had no experience. I'd never done anything. And the fact of the matter was that when Leith's had been open for about a month, we were losing money hand over fist. I had only enough money to last 6 months, about, providing I didn't lose the money too fast. And I was panicking because the restaurant, we'd had a lot of publicity.
Yeah.
The restaurant was packed. It was apparently doing very well. And so what I did was, I thought I better meet a restaurateur or two who can help me.
To see how it's going.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
And what I did was I joined the Restaurateurs Association, went to the House of Commons cocktail party on the terrace or whatever, and I met Albert Prue and Joseph Berkman. And I thought, that's fine, I know both their restaurants, so I nobbled them and I said, look, I'm in terrible trouble, my restaurant's losing money. And they said, you can't be, you charge a fortune, it's stacked, we've been there, you must be minting it. And I said, well, I'm not. And you know what, they both came round to help me. I said, well, come and tell me what's wrong. And it was fascinating because Joseph came round and he just went into my office and he opened the books, had a look, and he said, your chef is robbing you blind. Not something I'd thought of. And you know what? I'm very ashamed of this, but it's sort of typical of the times. I was talking to an Austrian, Joseph was Austrian. And so I said, but he can't be, he's English. I'm talking to an Austrian.
Yeah.
Anyway, he said rather quietly, well, actually the English can rob anybody just as well as anybody else. And that turned out to be true. And then Albert came along, and I thought he'd go in to look at my books and say, do the same sort of analysis. And he didn't. He went and stood by the rubbish bins. Yeah. And as the food came out, he said, he came and called me from my office, and he said, come. And I said, what's the matter? And he said, either you're serving really crap food, or it's either got to be disgusting, or you're giving them too much. He said, nobody needs half a duck with a whole lot of vegetables on a plate. It's just overpowering and they can't eat it all. And then he dug his hand into the bin and he pulled out an apple and he said, what is the matter with this apple, you see? And I said, I think, oh God, I hope they haven't thrown away a perfectly good apple. That would be too shaming. So I took the apple from him and I turned it round and it was bad, you see. And I said, Albert, I said, the apple is bad. And he said, no, it is only 1/3 bad. And he took a paring knife and cut the bit off and he gave me them.
Yeah.
And he said, why are the watercress stalks in the bin? And I said, they're the stalks. And he said, that's where the flavour is.
Yeah.
He said, that should be in the soup. And I mean, he taught me so much in such a short time. Anyway, I did whatever ever both of them told me. I sacked the chef and I started giving less portions. And guess what? We made money.
Yeah.
And that was because of what happens, I swear it only happens in the restaurant trade, is, well, that and on Bake Off, is people help their competitors.
Yeah. Knowing what you know now, would you go back and run a restaurant again?
Oh, I think I would.
Yeah.
I would, but it would be a very different sort of restaurant.
What sort of restaurant would it be then?
Well, I suppose it would be like so many people's restaurants now. I think, food has changed. I mean, I just wrote a new cookbook, and the first one I've written for 25 years, and it could have been written by somebody else, because all my previous cookbooks were because I had a school of food and wine, and they were very correct. I mean, this is the only way to make quiche Lorraine, and it has to be made exactly like this, and very sort of prescriptive and bossy, which is, I'm quite bossy, and boom, boom, everything's got to be so, and full of technical stuff. Well, today, most people want to cook in less than half an hour. They want really fresh ingredients. They want it to be original. They want it to be pretty. It has to be Instagrammable. It's just a different world.
Yeah.
And it was such fun writing a new book. But guess what? I got a young girl to help me because I would not have known half of that stuff, especially all the vegan stuff.
Yeah.
I'm still in trouble. Every now and again I tweet something and it turns out to be not the right thing.
But I mean that book itself, there's a lot of recipes in there, so it must have taken a lot of work as
Yeah,
well.
it did.
It's sort of,
But they're all recipes that I love,
Yeah.
and that I cook now.
Yeah.
There are some old-fashioned favourites in it because I mean, who doesn't want a tarte normande, full of apples and
Yeah.
calvados and butter and
Yeah.
bread. Love it. But there's also lots of modern and fresh and light theorems, and I really love that sort of stuff. And I like the way you can combine things. When I was growing up in the trade, we were still in the shadow of Escoffier. It sounds ridiculous because he died in 1921 or something, so he should have gone. But chefs like Boulestin, I remember, because I'm
Yeah.
old enough to remember Boulestin, and I remember him saying, if it's not in la cuisine, or it's not in the guide culinaire, it is not cuisine. So it had to be in Escoffier, which meant there wouldn't be any mango in it, there wouldn't be any fish sauce, there wouldn't be any Middle Eastern stuff. So things have changed,
Yeah.
and not all for the bad.
But, I mean, do you feel the public has changed as well? Because they're
Absolutely.
and
I mean,
obviously, I mean, you must play a big part in that because TV's a major part of that.
Yeah, well, I think two things are going. Well, a lot of things are going on, and they're not. It's not easy to sum it up as one trend. But what's been going on for a very long time, certainly for the last 30 or 40 years, is the poor have been getting poorer, and the rich have been getting richer, and that is fine for the rich and fine for the middle classes. Fine. Aspirant cooks
Yeah.
are having a much better time. When I first started writing in the Daily Mail in 1969 or 72 or something like that, if I wrote about broccoli or avocado pears,
Yeah.
I mean, I'd get this flood of letters from north of Watford saying, we've never heard of them. What are they? What are these things? So things, today, supermarkets are ahead of us very often. I mean, I go around supermarkets thinking, what is that? I've never heard of it. And because they've grasped at what people want is innovation and new stuff. So all of that's great if you've got the money and if you've got the skill.
Yeah.
If you, this is such an old hobby horse for me, I almost don't want to say it, but if you are poor and you can't cook and you haven't learned to cook and your mum didn't cook, you are not going to risk your benefit money on doing something healthy because you know the kids won't eat it and you don't like it anyway. To sum up, we could do, if we got government on our side, if they just realized where they should put their money, we could fix the obesity thing in a generation. But you have to do it wholeheartedly and the whole school, and you have to do what they do in Finland, which is basically ban lunch boxes, because you cannot trust parents not to put a finger of fudge. I mean, we all put a chocolate bar into something if we're doing it for our children. You ban lunch boxes, make lunch a lesson, everybody sits down, everybody eats a healthy meal. It's a different healthy meal every day, so that you get to used to different food, and you're hungry when you arrive because no food is allowed into school. I'm sorry to be so prescriptive, but what we've been mealy-mouthed saying we'll do it by persuasion, and we expect the caterers to do it. Why should the caterers be responsible for teaching children? I mean, it's great if they will, but that isn't what they're paid for. And if you just made it a lesson so that it was head teacher's responsibility to look after, to teach children to eat, and the best way to teach them to eat is to teach them to cook and eat. If you did that, we'd crack it. And they've done that in Finland, and I know a few schools in England that have done it, and
Because
it's amazing. It only
yeah.
takes a term to turn children on.
Because Jamie's done it, and then we've had John Vincent, and Henry Dibble be still doing that.
And what Henry is
Yeah.
doing is amazing.
Yeah.
And he's doing it with primary school children. But if you what's going to happen with his primary school kids? And I hope that by then we will change everybody else's thing as well. But Henry is using restaurant chefs to go into schools because he wants to have chefs with a real love of food and a real ability to cook well. And so he's sort of recruiting them from restaurant chefs who are tired of the long hours and sort of unsatisfactory business of working in a big organisation. You never see anybody cook, and you never see anybody eat your food, and you work your butt off, and you're exhausted all the time. So he's sort of grabbing those people. But he is saying, if you come into a school, you must also be the teacher. And because it's a primary school, his schools, they sit down with the children, the chef talks to the kids about the food, they grow stuff in the garden, and they do it all right. The problem is going to be when those children go into secondary school, within 5 minutes they will be shamed by bigger boys who will say, what are you eating that rubbish for? It's scary, isn't it? Because for years and years we've relied on Europe to produce so many of our great employees, and God knows what happens now. The good thing is that far more young British are going into the trade because it's now cool, and we can thank Jamie for that, really. That it's a cool thing to do, and so I guess some of that will help. To be honest, I'm not in your trade anymore, so I'm not having the anxiety. I did speak the other day to a chocolate maker, and he said he's got 4 months of chocolate stacked up. But he can't take more than that because the chocolate only lasts 7 months. So, if he doesn't if things don't sort out, he is going to have nothing to sell. But at least he's trying, and I think an enormous amount of people have got stuff stockpiled and are stockpiled, and I dare say you know about it. But my overall thing is, even if it's difficult, I don't want to dismiss lightly as people going bust or really struggling, but there is something entrepreneurial about the Brits, which is unbelievably resilient. I mean, if you think how many recessions we've all been through, how we came out after the war, after rationing, and we just are good at managing, and we will manage. But I'm not saying there won't be tragedy on the way. So I make a cake, and I do make it an awful lot because I know what the ingredients are. I don't have to look them up. The trouble with baking is you really need a reference book all the time. So it's not often. I mean, there are a few things I make without a recipe, but most of them I need. And the cake that I make is actually not my recipe. It's Ruthie Rogers' polenta, lemon, and almond cake. And it is unbelievably good. It always works. It's just delicious. And you can have it as it is, or you can put a bit of coulis on top and fruit or something and serve it with pudding. It's nice hot. It's nice cold. And it keeps forever. Nothing keeps forever in my house, but it would keep.